Hey everyone, and welcome back to another process walkthrough video. This one is the third one of the month, and we'll be taking a quick look at this particular piece. So this is the third piece of the set, where we kind of show off this sort of establishing shot of the character outside the aquarium store kind of thing. So yeah, let's go. So for the very first shot, we have this. So this was my initial kind of idea. It was pretty simple. I wanted to showcase the character standing outside the shop in this sort of very simple pose. I figured it's a good kind of juxtaposition versus the previous shots where, or rather the first shot really, where we had some sort of pretty extreme action. So we kind of wind down, right? Where the first one, there was a huge fight. Then the second one, it was kind of her, being kind of edgy, with a more static pose. Excuse me. And now we're at number 3, where we have this sort of more quiet, simple pose to show off the aftermath. So a pretty simple concept all in all, but what I think is pretty cool about this is that the scene, or rather the story, allows for us to create this scene. I think it's something that's pretty unique to this, so I do want to kind of showcase it. If we take a look here in the simple sketch, my intentions was to kind of indicate this is some sort of aquarium with both, traditional Chinese letters as well as English. So that was sort of an idea to show off. Maybe it's like old Hong Kong style. I always loved the old Kowloon style of architecture and stuff, and this is probably no different. So this area here is in service of that. Then we have the monster kind of in the background. Once again, right, I'm focusing on trying to make things, rather than making it super realistic, right? Because, of course, the monster will be blocking the door, then how did she get here, right? That's not the objective of this particular piece. Rather than that, I just wanted to kind of show how that, or I just wanted to show how having the character be superimposed over the monster and then the shot behind is a good way to really just show off all the elements that I want in a way that is very direct, but also kind of calm, almost semi-surreal, right? Because it doesn't make sense in a very logical kind of way. But recently, I've been starting to appreciate that more a bit, right? We can draw something that might feel a little bit surreal, not like fully logical, and allow that to run away for a bit, right? Even though I do the lighting quite accurately and so on, I'm also prioritizing the overall composition and what I'm showing, right? Rather than how exactly it's shown. And for the area below, I always like to do a bit of stairs. Stairs are a great way to guide people's attention, because if you just have flat ground, right, it's just kind of like, okay, there is flat ground, what do you want me to do about it? Is the viewer's impression. So with things like stairs, right, it always draws your attention. Same thing with like doorways. Stairs and doorways are, how do I put it? They are essentially markers of meaning, right? Because when you see a stair, or when you see a staircase or doorway or entryway, whatever, these types of things, when you see them even in real life, they indicate some sort of meaning, right? Because stairs bring you somewhere. Doorways are very substantial in the sense that they are quite literally a portal into a different place most of the time. So these things are meaningful in a way that flat ground just isn't, because flat ground doesn't tell you much. You can put a lot of fancy tiles on it or whatever. It doesn't tell you much, right? So stairs are something that is physical, and it helps to indicate a bit of purpose, so we just use it over here. And then we have like storage boxes, whatever nonsense outside. These I'm not too concerned with, because the focus should be around here, right? I'm not going to decorate these areas here super elaborately, and we'll see in a bit. So for this second stage is where I started to work in some lighting. So for the lighting with this sort of scene, it's a very complex scene, right? Furthermore, if you want to keep in the mood of the set, which is this sort of very dark, somewhat moody place, it's difficult to bring out the giant flashlight to blast the place like boom, and it's like show every single detail of everything. It doesn't quite work for this set, especially. In a way, it also doesn't work for this composition as a whole as well, because if you would think about it, right, exposing a scene fully like that removes any sense of mystery, and like here we do want to keep a little bit of mystery, so that doesn't quite work for us at all. Hence, I decided to go with this. So it's a type of shot where essentially the light kind of comes in only in the bottom half. You could think of it as maybe a bunch of signs or whatever obstructions in the street is blocking a car's headlight, right? A parked car or moving car's headlight shining this way, which is a different color. right? This area is lit from the side here, perhaps, and this area is just in shadow, but it receives a little bit of bounce light. Because if you think about it, the floor and the air character, or rather this area here is brightly lit, that is going to bounce some light onto this area here. So we want the gradient to be darker up here and then brighter up here. So this kind of gradient that appears when we account for the bounce light. So this is my usual fare. I'll account for the bright areas, and then within the shadow areas, I want to account for how the primary light still affects the shadow area, plus whether there are any secondary lights. So this is my plan, and I like it because rather than putting a spotlight on everything, we focus on a sense of mystery by having the character be a little bit in the dark and the lights be here, right? So we showcase the monster, we showcase some things that are simple, so we kind of draw attention to this area here, allow the composition and the placement of things to do their work, rather than, you know, super highlight certain things. Now, that was all great until we reached sort of this stage where I realized, like, the composition is fine, but just having red and blue without any additional light, it feels a little bit off. Plus, you know who I am, I like this kind of orange stuff, so in goes the orange light once again. So in this case, I like to think that orange light is kind of applicable because we've had the orange light, if you recall, in the previous piece. So it was a pretty small light, I just added it for accent, also add an accent color, and here essentially we're very much doing the same, except that we are also, well, making use of it now that we have it in the previous frame, right? So we can use it here, allow the light to kind of blast down, just grab a tiny bit of the character of the monster, creating this sort of rim light effect. We don't want it to be spilling everywhere, you know, that's not what we want. We're not here for that. We want to make sure that the blue light remains the dominant light. It's still a dark, you know, slightly mysterious night, but we want to add a little bit of accent color to here to kind of maybe tune down the creepy factor a little bit. It's not like a horror image, it's kind of like a job's done type of feel. So here we are. This is the sort of stage where I feel, okay, I'm pretty confident to go ahead with this. The colors look fine. Let's see what we can do. So the next part here is me kind of dealing with this gray zone here, because this gray zone shouldn't be here. There's no color that is this gray that should be here. There's no reason for it to be, because if it's in shadow, then right, the whole place is pretty bluish. So give it a bit of a blue tint. Or even if it's slightly less bluish, right, we give it a slight tint of that, right? But in no situation should it be just gray. So one of those things that you want to take note of. Try not to have too much gray unless you really, really know what you're doing. I think it's mainly because gray doesn't really have a direction most of the time. So if you want to use it, like you can use it here, right? Because we know the signboard here is pretty gray, right? It's almost certainly white and it's not receiving the direct blue light. So it's perfectly fine to make it less blue than, let's say, this area here. But for the windows here, it's a completely different place, right? It's not at the front of the store. It's not here. It's inside the store. So to prevent any confusion between these two materials, right? This material and this material, we do want to change it, and we do so over here, right? Where you notice that I allow it to kind of fade into the background a bit more. And this is also where different props get added. For example, the gachapon machines, like these little boxes here and there, styrofoam boxes probably for the shop. You know, when they do delivery, sometimes they're not able to put it in, or maybe these are boxes that the shop is already done with, and they want to get it out. So these elements are very common when you look at reference, right? And you just got to think just a little bit as to why they're outside, and it kind of makes sense. Taking deliveries and doing all this is a lot easier if a delivery man can just drop it off outside, and then you can exchange boxes or whatever, right? So it's just kind of a little bit of flavor to add to the piece. And one of the things I also want to note is that these little textures here are really good, right? These little textures here are really good. The reason being, when you have a large area here that is painted roughly, right? It's fine. But if you want your scene to feel a bit more complete, patterns are the easiest way to do it, because you don't have to draw the same pattern 50 different times. You just draw it once, duplicate it a couple of times, 10 times, you're done, right? It's easy to do so with digital tools, so make use of them. And they really help to anchor the scene in a way that allows you to further build on it. Because as you can see here, right? Previously, it was just a bunch of very rough texture, you know, a bit of this, it's just messy. But once we anchor it with this sort of towel pattern, suddenly it becomes tiles that have maybe taken a bit of damage, or maybe it's scratched, or maybe just reflecting light differently. It suddenly becomes a lot more meaningful in a way that we essentially took a shortcut to. Now, of course, this is pretty much relevant for areas that are not quite as central or super important. So yeah, just to take note of that. One more thing is that notice that I use this texture here, right? This is from basically a photo reference. I just copied and pasted it directly with a bit of color tweaking. And the purpose for this is that sometimes it's helpful, it's not always. Sometimes it's helpful to get a feel for something. As you can see here, my lettering is terrible, right? I want to quickly be able to get a take a quick feel of how this might feel like to have a proper signboard. So I extracted it from reference, took a look at it and felt, okay, it looks good. So in the next one, we drew our own, right? I typed it out in the font, used a couple of simple selection, expand selection, layer fill stuff to kind of create this effect. Basically 3 layers, 1 layer of red, 1 layer of this gray, and 1 layer of the black to create this semi 3D effect. Is super basic stuff. But because I was able to preview it, I can now spend the time to do something that might feel a little bit more tedious like this, right? So moving from here to here is very much just a case of doubling down on my choices, slowly refining things a bit more. As you can see, I added this sort of yellow crate here. The yellow crate here is pretty good, and the blue crate as well, because it adds just a tad of color to this area here. So as I mentioned before, local color is really important if you want to make your scene feel real, because in real life, there are all sorts of different things of different colors everywhere. Even though they might be small, they might be inconspicuous, they might not be very meaningful, they're still everywhere. So you kind of got to take note of that. And it just really helps a lot to have something small like this that can help you add just a tiny bit of variation, right? Same for the area here, right? I use a bit of orange tone here, a bit of blue here, a bit of yellow. The rest, most of it is just red. I don't really care too much. But the idea here is that you want to achieve the overarching feel of what this area should look like, right? The overarching feel, the big picture. I always like to talk about big to small. Big to small is not necessarily just in terms of physical size of objects or the things in the composition, but in terms of meaning. The biggest, most important part of this area here is I want to show a couple of gachapon machines and a miscellanea, right? So to do that, the biggest element here is the difference between these plastic tubs, the dispenser thing, the plastic tub, the dispenser thing. This is sort of the pattern that you see in gachapon machines that kind of just stacked up outside shops, right? So this is the big picture. In terms of small picture, you can see I really did not put much attention here. It's super roughly drawn once again with my trusty round brush. As you can see, the brush marks match perfectly. So these here, I only touched on the big picture, indicated these were like plastic tubs, these were like the dispenser units. Here, I did not even bother too much. I just threw in a couple of different colors to indicate different objects. And if you look from afar, it's pretty much done, right? But if you look from up close, clearly it's terrible. But from afar, as long as the basics are met, for example, this area here is in shadow, this area here is a bit brighter, you're done, right? It's good. If this is not the center of attention, once again, neither is this in bright light. If this was in bright light, then you might very well need to draw it in a lot more detail. But once again, the idea is big to small, right? Capture the most important aspects of a certain thing, and then you're good to go. It's a lot easier to fill in details later on because the big picture is going to really tell you what it looks like, what kind of potential it has, and so on. And now moving on to the final scene. So moving on to the final scene, well, before that, let me talk a little bit about this, right? This sort of transparent material, when the light kind of is behind, right? The light's behind here, and then we have these, you know, what do they call these? These soft kind of doors where it helps to keep the air conditioning in, right? Where it allows the air to not leave the place every time it opens. Basically, it opens minimally for smallest possible amount of cold air to get out, and then people walk through them. You know, she's probably pissing off the store owners by standing right there, leaving this giant gap. But given the state of the place, I'm pretty sure the aircon's not working anymore. So yeah. Oh yeah, by the way, the aircon is also here now, right? So it's something I like to do a lot. Aircon units they're just flavorful, right? They're just so flavorful. Like, it adds free detail. It's a free object you can always put in. It's real as well. Believe it or not, it's real as well and pretty common. So yeah. But otherwise, right, as you can see here for the character, I'm starting to fill in more of the details and highlights on the character. That is what is kind of this stage, right, where we want to take the areas that are the most well lit, for example this region here, and with the blue light it's about this region here, because the character and the monster is the most important around here and around here. So once again, the idea is that you don't really have to draw a full huge scene like this perfectly, especially if you play your lighting right. If you look back at my old drawings, there's quite a few where like one of my characters, Irina, is in kind of like this very well lit home bathroom, and because it's very well lit, I had to draw everything super detailed. And the result of that is that it took a lot of time, but it's the kind of the price you have to pay if you want to use certain types of lighting. It's convincing in certain different ways, and that's just how it goes. So towards the end here, as you can see, I tighten up this area a bit more because of the fact that it's in the light. I think what I could also have done is to indicate the cast shadow here a little bit more, make it a little bit more obvious, right? Something like this I think would be pretty helpful, which I regrettably did not do, silly as I am. So yeah, something like this, right? So well, I'll leave this for a remaster probably, because I spotted a mistake immediately, so I think I'll spot it again next time as well when I'm eventually remastering this. So the idea is that we want to clean up areas where it's exposed to bright light, allow for a couple of sharper details to come out, like for example a highlight in the monster's eye, right? Or more closer brush strokes to indicate it, that's perfectly fine. These like fortune calendars or posters or whatever ads. I also typed it in the font as well. So once again, bright light areas, draw it kind of tightly, draw it kind of clean. Areas with secondary light, not so clean, but maybe a little bit of detail when you're finishing up. But otherwise, right, like dark areas here, we just leave it a bit more blur. And the top area here is pretty much unchanged with a couple of more textures and dangling wires and a summoning circle, presumably what caused this to happen in the first place. And otherwise, the character is really cleaned up, is rounded up, everything is done pretty much at this point, and that's pretty much it for this particular process. The focus is really, I would say, on the lesson for this piece is really on distributing your details. Where do you spend your time at, right? Choosing the right lighting, and if the right lighting allows for it, you can choose where you want to spend your time working in the details, right? Is this area the most important? Is this area the most important? You know, which is it? And then by correctly placing your attention in different places, you're going to be able to achieve a result in a relatively efficient way. So yeah, that is the lesson for this particular piece. Once again, if you have any questions, please absolutely feel free to drop them in the comments. Excuse me. I'll be very happy to answer them as always. Once again, thank you so much for your support here. We've got one more video, at least for the month, and that will be the last process walkthrough for this set coming up next. So once again, thanks so much for your support, and I'll see you soon.